Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. Big Podcast Insider Edition. That's my weekly newsletter. It goes out every Friday morning, New York time. I'm David Hooper, and this is what we're going to cover on this episode. Apple who? Right-wing preacher accidentally gives drag queen #1 hit. Break through the noise with a spiky point of view. Crystal sound. This fixes bad audio. Everybody sounds great. Almost. And also some classified ads, things that I think will help your podcast and that you should know about. This episode brought to you by Riverside.fm. Used by over 70,000 people and companies, Riverside.fm is going to make your podcast sound great. How? By recording unbelievably high recording quality, regardless of you or your guest internet quality. This happened to me just this week. Had a guest drop out on me. Couldn't hear her. And she couldn't hear me. But because of that, she kept going. And thanks to recording locally, which is exactly what Riverside does, by the time I could hear her again, she was finishing up her answer. I asked her the next question. It was like nothing ever happened. It sounded perfect. If you're doing remote recording, these things happen. You don't want them to affect your recordings. Riverside.fm has a very intuitive and easy to use interface. Your guests don't need to install anything. Your guest simply clicks a link and joins you in the Riverside studios. Everything is online, Riverside.fm. That's where to go to try it for free. They'll give you a couple of hours, kick the tires, look under the hood, see how it works for you. I think you're going to like it. The discount code to get you 15% off. Big Podcast, BIGPODCAST. The beginning of this episode, I talked about what's in this issue. Yeah, you want to know about the drag queen, don't you? We're going to get there. I'm going to start with a story about Apple, though. And when I switch, you're going to hear this sound.
Yes.
You're going to hear that in between every story that I do, just like an old school children's audiobook. Remember those? When you hear this sound,
yes,
turn the page. And if you want to follow along, you can do that at
newsletter.bigpodcast.com.
That's where all the links are. Remember that.
Newsletter.bigpodcast.com.
You ready?
yes.
Here we go. Apple who? When I was 12, a friend of mine got one of the very first Macs. And I mean that. Very first Macs. And it was free. His father was a copywriter who worked on the early ad campaigns. Apple wanted him to know and understand the computer that he was trying to sell. $128K. Everybody else had to pay $24.95. And I'm talking about $2,495. That was in 1984. Today, about $7,000 for that. That was the first time I'd ever used a Macintosh. They called them Macintosh back then. You know them as Macs. I said that the other day to a guy. He goes, yeah, they're called Macs now. Hey, they're still Macintosh to me. I used them throughout school. That's because I was involved in music. And everybody in the creative business had a Macintosh. Musicians, writers, graphic designers. But barely anybody outside of the creative business did. Apple only had about 10% of the general market. And beyond music, word processors, maybe graphic design, there were not a whole lot of software options. Most titles were Windows only. Fast forward to today, walk in your local hipster coffee shop. Everybody's on a Macintosh, Mac. And Apple, when it comes to podcasting, dominates podcasting. And that's why I'm bringing this up. Things change, man. Apple does not dominate podcasting outside the United States. Only 30.44% of smartphones are iPhones outside the US, which means that 69.66% of potential podcast listeners cannot access Apple Podcasts. Are you neglecting those people? If so, I want you to rethink your strategy. This is low-hanging fruit. Every podcaster that I talk to, you say, what do you want? I want more listeners. All right, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing some stuff on Apple Podcasts. Okay, great. There's a world outside of Apple Podcasts, and it is a big world. Almost 3/4 of people cannot access Apple Podcasts. So what are you doing, man? What are you doing? This is the first step that I'd take. I would set up a mobile-first web page. I've got one linked. You can copy it. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. It has an option not only for iPhone users, but also Android devices. I also have a list of about 20 places that you can submit to, not Apple Podcast, that will get your podcast in the hands of more people who are interested in it. If you want those, newsletter.bigpodcast.com.
Yes.
Speaking of Apple, but let me back up a minute. Right-wing Christian musician and preacher, I'm not even going to say this guy's name, but let's just say this. He can't win After bringing his Let Us Worship concert to the Indiana State House, local members of the Satanic Temple demanded access for a concert of their own. That concert, they called it Let It Burn, is coming in September. And this just happened. He condemned a drag queen. Her name is Flamey Grant. You get it? Like Amy Grant? Flamey Grant. The song was called Good Day. The LP, Bible Belt Baby. He got so much publicity that album hit #1 on Apple Music. That is an opportunity for you. Not everybody is going to like what you do, and some people will actually actively dislike what you do, or they'll like it in secret. You know what I mean? Wink, wink. It's possible to redirect negative press and comments to make them work for you. That's exactly what happened to Flamey Grant. For example, putting a bad review of your podcast on the front of your website. You might have seen this happen with restaurants, stores. John from Yelp says we suck. Come in and have the margarita that John from Yelp says was watered down. People lean into it, and you can lean into it too. Not that you want to reward bad behavior, but do know that somebody coming at you with negativity and hate is not always the harsh action that it may initially seem. Sometimes it's a blessing. Ask Flamey Grant, #1 Christian record on Apple Music. Wouldn't have happened without this right-wing guy. Consider Flamey next time you get a bad review. Make it work for you.
Yes.
Break through the noise with a spiky point of view. I love this thread, and I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. We live in an extremely noisy world, especially online. How do you stand out in a noisy world? Wes Cowell calls it a spiky point of view. Here are the elements to it. 1, a spiky point of view can be debated. It's something that's open for discussion. It gets people talking. And when you get people talking, you're going to get attention. 2, a spiky point of view isn't controversial for the sake of it. 3, a spiky point of view is rooted in evidence, but it doesn't have to be a proven fact or universal truth. Let's talk about why it matters. If everybody agrees with you, whatever you're talking about is obvious. It doesn't need to be debated. It doesn't need additional commentary. But on the positive side, you're not simply trying to be contrarian or just stirring the pot. The world doesn't need any more of that either. That's the preacher talking about Flamey Grant. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, ugly. That guy's going to be against it. A better approach for you, your podcast, and the world. It's a perspective that's defensible, but also something that people can and will disagree with. So there can be a discussion around it. That's what makes ideas strong, and that's what causes ideas to spread. The earth is round. Now look, people are debating that. People can more or less debate everything, but you see where I'm going. Give people something that most people would be open to discussing. I'm talking about an opinion, not scientific fact. If you can do that, if you can get people discussing things, that's good. What I talked about earlier, you are leaving money on the table and listeners on the table when you neglect Android users. That is something that a lot of people, believe it or not, will debate. The stats are there, and I can say, yeah, this is what it looks like as far as stats go. The stats are there, but people have a personal experience and opinion about Apple Podcasts and belief about Apple Podcasts because that is where the majority of podcasters focus. Here's the #1 big idea. As a host, you are 50% an instructor, 50% an entertainer. Attention spans are short, and the responsibility is on you, the host, not the listener, to help listeners understand why they should care. In other words, you're not here just to deliver information like a fact sheet. Don't just give your listeners facts. Your job is to deliver information in a way that's compelling. Remember, 50% instructor, 50% entertainer. And maybe that's something like the drag queen story. There's a situation that you're in, negative reviews, feeling bad about negative reviews, and that drag queen story, it's extreme. And what I mean by that, what is a drag queen? A drag queen is an accentuated, extreme version of a woman. It's a female impersonator. Am I getting this right? If I'm not, listen, let me know. If there's something more to it than I'm missing, hit me up, say, no, there's something more to it. David, you missed this. Okay, I'm open to that. But you see what I'm saying? It's an extreme form of entertainment, not in a bad way, but it's just accentuated. Big hair, big makeup, wittiness, hilarity, snark. This lady's name is Flamey Grant. She's making fun of Amy Grant. Or is she? Maybe it's commentary. I don't know. The point is, Bible Belt Baby. That is something bigger than just a Christian album. It's probably hilarious. Hadn't heard it. But it's that kind of line in the sand, stake in the ground. That's the kind of thing that's going to make people pay attention. That's what I'm talking about. It's not controversy for controversy's sake. It's not arguments for argument's sake. But it's presenting something probably that your audience is going through in a more extreme way. More information, newsletter.bigpodcast.com.
Yes.
Crystal Sound. This fixes bad audio. This past week, there's been a jackhammer outside of my office every day. Huge sewer project on my street. Fortunately, where I am right now, my studio, it's in the back of the house. Huge acoustic panels. If you want to see those, by the way, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. I've got those linked. Sometimes, though, even with the best sound treatment, we still find ourselves with bad audio. Guests who don't show up for remote sessions with quality mics, kids screaming in the background. You've been there. Then what? Crystal Sound, that may be a good option for you, is an AI-powered tool. It can isolate voices to make it sound like you are speaking in absolute silence. It is very similar to Dialogue Isolate from Isotope. It works with any desktop operating system, including Windows, Mac, or Macintosh, as I call it, Linux. It integrates on any app that uses a microphone. So Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, Slack. If you're recording audio, it will work with the audio you've got. It's only $39 for life. If you want to sound better, it's worth a look. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com.
Yes.
Everybody sounds great. Almost. There's always one guy when you're doing a group session. He wants to join in with his kid's gaming headset. This can be especially distracting if you've got video. Everybody's on great mics, Shure SM7Bs, RE20s, and some guy, he's got the headset with the built-in mic and this thing's lit up. Looks like the Las Vegas Strip. What do you do, man? What do you do? Crystal Sound, maybe that can help you. It can certainly isolate the background noise. But your best option for great sound is to show up with a great mic. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can get a good quality mic for just $59. Talking about a USB mic usually. Those plug directly into your computer. They don't require any special equipment. And something like the Samsung Q2U, it's also got an XLR connection. That's a great utility mic. Any situation that you're in, it is going to be able to get the sound that you need. So if you have not seen that mic, even if you've already got these other mics, you might think about getting an XLR mic that has USB, Samsung Q2U. Consider it. I've got a funny meme that goes along with this. You know, like throw a little humor in the newsletter. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com.
Yes.
Classified ads. Swell AI automates writing podcast summaries, articles, social notes, and more. Upload your podcast audio, boom, spits out episode notes. That is how it works. You can manage multiple shows in one dashboard. You can build custom templates for each show, and it connects with Google Drive, Dropbox, and Zoom. You can get started for free. I've got it linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Also, AudioPen, the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text, including podcast outlines. Just hit record, start rambling. AudioPen spits out your text. It is very handy, and these two tools work so great together. You got an episode idea? Pull up AudioPen, speak it into AudioPen using your phone. It gives you the outline. Record your podcast, then put it in Swell AI. Swell AI does your episode notes. Boom, boom, you are done. Podcast episode creation using the power of AI. Two tools that I absolutely love. You can check them both out at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. When you are ready, here's how I can help you even more. If you like the newsletter, you like Build a Big Podcast, you're going to love Big Podcast AMP. AMP stands for Audio Monetization Program. It's my personal coaching program for podcasters that has been designed to help you do three things. 1, grow your podcast audience. 2, get people talking about your podcast. 3, make more money with your podcast. I've got all the details at bigpodcast.com/amp, bigpodcast.com/amp, or, yeah, you know it, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you want to subscribe to make sure that you never miss an episode, you know I got you covered at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. 3 links for you. Apple Podcasts, of course. But I don't want to miss almost 3/4 of listeners. So I've also got an Android link. I've got an RSS feed. However you get your podcast, I'm going to get this podcast to you. I've even got a QR code that you can scan. It makes it very easy for you to subscribe. All you got to do is scan it. It transfers Build a Big Podcast to your phone. You won't believe it. It's like magic. It is. Check it out. bigpodcast.com/subscribe. That's the URL. Go there now before you forget. Subscribe. Never miss an episode. And I'll see you on the next Build a Big Podcast.